Record. Okay, so I'll yeah, I'm going to ask everybody else to mute themselves, and then I will proceed with the just doing a brief introduction here for today's presentation. Okay. So today's topic is historical materialism. For the last couple of sessions, we talked about, first of all, we showed we talked about the actual rules of how the capitalist economy works, about where profit comes from, surplus value. Also, we did the second session, we did kind of an actual history of capitalism, that is imperialism, how competitive capitalism evolved into the more modern form that we have, which is imperialism, which is international form that's dominated by large corporations. So what we're going to do today is sort of take a bit of a step back and sort of use what we've discussed so far as being particular case studies of a more general concept of just what human history is. So we can talk about like some of the concepts and some of the rules that apply to all the kinds of societies that there are, like through the grand sweep of human history. And the reason for this is so that we can master these concepts and make use of them as analytical tools to be able to focus on, once again, on our own current history, to improve our understanding of what's going on in modern day capitalism and how to project our strategy going forward. So again, this is intended not just as an abstract theoretical kind of discussion, but as a really practical mastery of the concepts that we need to analyze our current situation. So the term that we use for how our basic philosophy of human history is historical materialism. So first of all, what does materialism mean? Essentially, it means that there's only one world, the material world, and the matter and the energy that's in it, the forces that comply with the rules of physics and chemistry and so on that we work to understand through scientific research. There's no mysterious outside force. There's no abstract concepts that mysteriously show up, make themselves manifest. That history is the outcome of human activity, and if general ideas or general concepts seem to make themselves manifest, it's because human beings looking at this history can detect patterns in it and assign names and meaning to those patterns that they see in history. It's not that some abstract concept was already there trying to work its way out through the course of human history. Human history is the outcome of human activity. And so history also has its own laws of development, which is, in some ways, it's analogous to, the laws of development in biology, where we talk about evolution. So history is not exactly the same as biology. The kinds of laws that apply are not exactly the same as the laws of biology, but to the same extent, we look for recurring patterns and recognize those as actual laws of development in human history. So before I actually go on to what laws we actually think we can see in human history, I'll just talk about a couple of the concepts that we need to come back to understand these laws. And one of these is a pair of concepts of the base and the superstructure. When we talk about base in the context of human societies, what we mean is the economic forces and relations of society, which consists of the actual resources, the material resources that a society has, the the technology that it has, the techniques and the machinery that have been so far discovered and put to use, and the social relations that arise out of the use of those particular technologies. So the base, in the crudest sense, we could say that the base is the economy. The base is the human activities that are involved in directly supporting the material existence of the members of society. Superstructure in this context means the ideas and the institutions, the ideologies, the culture, all the non-material forms that the society takes that arise on that base. And the basic premise of historical materialism is that base determines superstructure. That is, the ideas we have about the world, that we have about ourselves, and the ideas we have about our society, including things like religion and ideas of morality and legality and all kinds of social interactions and customs, in the last analysis, arise from the base. They arise out of the economic form of organization of society. But, and Marx and Engels underline this, emphasize this, only in the last analysis. That is, there's all kinds of complications, subtleties, nuances about how the superstructure develops from the base. So that although we ultimately go back and explain the nature of a culture and the nature of its ideas from how the society is organized on an economic level, it's not a crudely deterministic result. There can be all kinds of different histories, different previous social structures and cultures that influence the working out of the development of the superstructure. So, although we look for the basic fundamental connection between how the economy is organized and the forces of production and the relations of production, we look for the relationship between those forces and relations and all the other aspects of society, including people's ideas and ideologies. We don't look for it to be crudely one-to-one correspondence. We can expect all kinds of subtle differences, and the base determines the superstructure, but not in a crudely mechanistic way. And so we have to actually look at the history to see how this development of ideas arising from conditions of life plays itself out. We can't say ahead of time it's going to turn out exactly like this. There's always possibility of things turning out differently. So the concept of base and superstructure are those that we would come back to ultimately understand what's going on in the development of a society. But that doesn't exempt us from having to really look at the actual events and understand them in light of those concepts, rather than just saying that using the words base and superstructure does not by itself prove that we have understood anything. We actually have to clarify our understanding of what's really going on. So we're not exempt from having to actually have the real material of actual events taking place in the society to apply these concepts to. So the second really big concept that's involved in our historical materialist conception of history is the idea of class struggle. And that, as the most succinct phrase for this, is class struggle is the motive force of history. In other words, ever since the beginning of the existence of class societies in which there are different classes of people, exploiters and exploited, the struggle between them has gone on unrelentingly, and it's the course of that struggle is what pushes history forward, is what pushes societies forward. Now, it doesn't mean, again, that there's some rigid, predetermined outcome. There's a very important sentence, I think, in the Communist Manifesto, where they talk about how, the history of all previous societies has been the history of class struggle, and that in every case, this struggle has resulted in either breaking through into a new higher level of society, in other words, a revolution, or in the common ruin of the contending classes. So it is not a foregone conclusion that the revolution must triumph and that socialism will be established and everything will be fine and we'll solve all our problems. Far from it. This is something that has to be fought out because, as I think more and more people are realizing as we plunge deeper into the climate crisis right now, the common ruin of the contending classes is a possible outcome. The society may simply collapse. I mean, this is certainly not what we want to happen. And I do not believe that that is what happens. I remain optimistic looking at the balance of forces in the world in general. But it's not because history is predestined to come out that way. It will turn out that way if the working class forces are stronger in the ultimately than the bourgeois forces attempting to hold them back. So if we look back through, if we look through like the whole of human history meaning we're starting from the point of the discovery of agriculture, the creation of settled cities, civilizations with written documents. We're kind of setting aside the longest period of the existence of the human race, which in Marx and Engels' time they referred to as prehistory, which has sometimes been referred to as the period of primitive communism. Nowadays, people don't like to use that term primitive because it carries a lot of colonial and racist baggage for many people. So there are various other terms that people might use. I don't think a particular single term has been hit upon, but basically for the greater part of the existence of the human race, people lived by a hunting and gathering form of existence, which was essentially one in which they lived hand to mouth. There were no surpluses that could be accumulated and stored to speak of. So there were no social issues about who owned or controlled that surplus. But as soon as, in fact, you did have animal husbandry, pastoralism, like that is, shepherds, or agriculture, or possibly a few other potentially a few other forms that could give rise to a surplus, like in exceptionally rich natural environments, it might have been fishing. But as soon as you had a surplus, then it becomes a social issue. Who owns and controls this surplus and what do they use it for? And then you set the stage for the rise of classes, that is, groups of people who will have different positions within the overall productive process. And then you will have exploiters and exploited. So essentially through the whole sweep of human history over the last 15,000 years or so, you've had periods of slavery, we've had periods of feudalism, we've had periods of capitalism, and we've had some of the first periods of socialism, although those have been only partial in the world so far, not embracing the entire world. So in the broadest sense, we can say that we have these great epochs of history characterized by the different modes of production, that is a different level of technology developed and different relations of production, whether it's slave owners or plantation owners or feudal manor owners or factory owners, or in the modern era, more like corporation owners who have been the owners and controllers of the accumulated wealth of the society. So those descriptions are actually, again, somewhat Eurocentric. That Marx and Engels, when they were developing their overall view of human history, were using mostly European examples. And the different forms, somewhat different forms of the different structure of class societies in other parts of the world, the empires in Latin America that preceded the conquest, Incas, Mayas, Aztecs, and so on, the different forms that it took in various parts of Asia, different empires, kingdoms, different forms of feudalism, of slavery and feudalism, which were different there than different in their details in different parts of the world. So again, we don't try to force every society and the history of every country into sort of rigid categories. There will be some intermediate cases and some nuances, some ways in which the form of slavery or feudalism or even capitalism has been different in different parts of the world. And the history of the transition from one to the other has certainly been different in different parts of the world. But still, we can say that in the most general terms, that class struggle is the motive force of history, that each of these societies in which there are classes, in which there are exploiters and exploited, have experienced class struggle, and that the transition from one form to another has taken place through class struggle, and breakthroughs have occurred when a new class has emerged as the new ruling class within a society. The difference that we look forward to in the era that we are in now of transition to socialism is that now we're moving to a situation that's going to once again actually abolish classes. Every previous revolution has substituted one ruling class, one exploiting class, with another. A new ruling class has emerged out of new, more highly developed economic forces and relations. And new forms of exploitation have arisen out of these new relations. So along with a new ruling class, there has been a new exploited class has arisen in new conditions. But the transition to socialism and ultimately to communism is different in that this is the transition which will abolish exploitation by making the working class the ruling class and restructuring the base and the superstructure such that exploitation is abolished. There will no longer be classes. The differences between people will be individual differences, not class differences. And the form that will take over a relatively long period, I mean, what will be the superstructure? We don't yet know for sure. Because, as I said before, these things don't just happen in a simple mechanical way. In some ways, we're going to have to wait and see what will be the new ideas and the new cultures and the new social institutions that arise under new circumstances as classes begin to be abolished and as exploitation begins to be abolished. We can say some things in very general terms, like obviously, certain kinds of distinctions have to be abolished. Sexism, racism, national chauvinism, all those sorts of things simply must be removed from the world. Socialism has that historical task. We will not have succeeded without having also abolished those kinds of forms of oppression. But just exactly how that will work itself out and just what kind of culture arises once those plagues have been conquered and have been abolished, We don't really know. We have no experience of that. We don't know what it's like to live in a world without gender, race, national, and other forms of oppression and inequality and biases. So, I mean, I look forward to, I hope to actually see some of this transition within my own lifetime. But in general, we can only say in very general terms what the outcome of human history would be, based on these basic ideas that the superstructure arises on the base of economic forces and relations, so that a changed economy and a changed set of relations of production will give rise to a new culture and a new ideology. And based on the concept that class struggle is the motive force of history, that the working class, in fact, is the only class available to us under capitalist conditions to take the lead in this class struggle, to replace the bourgeois class as the ruling class, and to lead society forward. So the working class will not do this without allies. There are other groups in society, but the working class is the only class in existence which is in a position to take the lead in this struggle. It's the only class whose interest it is to abolish all forms of exploitation and therefore to abolish all classes in society. So that's what I want to talk about generally. And so at this point now, once again, I would like to throw it open for further discussion. So I'm going to stop the share. I think I will stop the recording and then just invite people to take part in the discussion.